A teacher was fired for having a prosthetic leg, but what happened next exposed a truth so powerful it changed an entire community forever. And today, you're going to discover how one woman's courage in the face of discrimination transformed not just a school, but the hearts of everyone who witnessed her extraordinary journey. Comment below what you think makes someone truly capable, because this story will challenge everything you believe about strength, heroism, and the power of the human spirit. The morning sun cast long shadows across the colorful facade of Sunshine Daycare Center, where children's laughter echoed through the crisp autumn air. Parents hurried past the welcoming entrance, their coffee cups steaming in the cool breeze, dropping off their most precious cargo for another day of learning and play. The building itself seemed to radiate warmth, with its bright yellow walls adorned with handprints of every color imaginable and windows that sparkled like jewels in the morning light. Inside classroom number 3, Sarah Martinez adjusted her prosthetic leg with the practiced discretion of someone who had learned to navigate the world differently. Her movements were fluid, almost dance-like, as she arranged art supplies on tiny tables, each one perfectly positioned for small hands to reach. The metallic click of her prosthetic against the linoleum floor created a gentle rhythm, barely audible above the soft hum of the heating system. Her long flowing skirt moved gracefully around the device, a deliberate choice that spoke of both practicality and dignity. The walls around her told stories of countless days filled with joy and discovery. Handwritten thank you. Letters from parents were thumbtacked next to finger-painted masterpieces that bore titles like "My Teacher is the Best" and "Miss Sarah Makes Me Happy." A large banner stretched across the back wall proclaimed in rainbow letters, "Everyone is special in their own way," with each letter decorated by a different child's artistic vision. Sarah's reflection caught in the window as she worked, revealing a woman whose warm brown eyes held depths of compassion earned through personal struggle. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, secured with a bright red scrunchie that one of her students had given her the previous week. Small paint stains dotted her cheerful yellow cardigan, badges of honor from countless art projects and messy crafting sessions. The sound of tiny running feet announced the arrival of her first students. Tommy burst through the door like a miniature tornado, his sneakers squeaking against the floor as he skidded to a stop in front of Sarah's desk. His hair stuck up in 3 different directions despite his mother's obvious attempts to tame it, and his backpack, covered in dinosaur stickers, bounced wildly behind him. "Miss Sarah! Miss Sarah! Look what I drew last night!" Tommy's voice carried the unbridled excitement that only a 4-year-old could muster. His small hands clutched a piece of construction paper that had been folded and unfolded so many times it resembled a roadmap more than artwork. Sarah lowered herself carefully, using the desk for support, bringing herself to Tommy's eye level. The movement was graceful despite the mechanical precision required, a testament to years of adaptation and determination. Her face lit up with genuine delight as Tommy thrust the drawing toward her. "Let me see this masterpiece," she said, her voice carrying the musical cadence of her Puerto Rican heritage. The drawing showed stick figures holding hands in front of a house, but one figure stood out. While the others had typical stick legs, one figure gleamed with metallic silver lines extending from the hip down. "It's my family," Tommy announced proudly, pointing to each figure with a stubby finger marked by blue crayon. "That's Mommy, that's Daddy, that's my sister Anna, and that's you." His finger stopped at the silver-legged figure. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. In all her years of teaching, she had never seen herself included in a student's family drawing. But what struck her most deeply was how Tommy had drawn her prosthetic leg, not as something to hide or ignore, but as something that made her special, something that gleamed like treasure. "Tommy, this is the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "May I keep it on my desk so everyone can see how talented you are?" "Of course, because you're part of my family, Miss Sarah, and you're super special with your robot leg." Tommy beamed with pride, completely unaware of the profound impact his innocent words had on the woman before him. As more children filtered into the classroom, each bringing their own energy and personality, Sarah felt the familiar warmth that came with doing work she truly loved. Marcus arrived with his careful, methodical way of hanging up his jacket, smoothing out every wrinkle. Lily bounced in with pigtails that seemed to have a life of their own, already chattering about the butterfly she had seen in her backyard. Emma entered quietly, staying close to the wall, her shyness a protective shell that Sarah had been gently working to crack all semester. But something felt different this morning. Sarah noticed the way some parents lingered at the door, their conversations stopping abruptly when she looked their way. She caught glimpses of pointed looks and hushed whispers that made the air feel heavier than usual. The comfortable routine of morning greetings felt stilted, as if an invisible tension had settled over the room like morning fog. The heavy wooden door swung open with more force than necessary, causing several children to look up from their play. Karen Williams entered with the purposeful stride of someone on a mission. Her perfectly styled blonde hair didn't move despite her brisk walk, and her designer handbag clutched tightly against her side spoke of someone accustomed to getting her way. Behind her, Emma tried to make herself even smaller, sensing the storm that seemed to follow her mother wherever she went. "Emma, go play with the blocks," Karen commanded, her voice carrying the sharp edge of barely controlled irritation. Emma scurried away, glancing back with worried eyes at the interaction brewing between her mother and beloved teacher. Karen's heels clicked against the floor in staccato beats as she approached Sarah's desk, each step echoing with determination. The sound drew the attention of every child in the room, their natural instincts picking up on the adult tension that suddenly filled the space like smoke. "Mrs. Martinez, we need to discuss something important." Karen's voice was low but carried clearly across the room. She positioned herself in front of Sarah's desk like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Sarah set down the crayons she had been organizing and gave Karen her full attention. Years of dealing with concerned parents had taught her to remain calm and professional, even when her heart began to race with apprehension. "Of course, Mrs. Williams. How can I help you?" Sarah's voice remained steady, though she could feel the curious eyes of her students watching the exchange. Karen glanced around the room, noting the children's attention, then leaned closer to Sarah's desk. Her voice dropped to what she probably thought was a whisper but carried clearly in the morning quiet. "Look, I don't want to be the bad guy here, but several mothers have been talking. We're concerned about whether you can adequately supervise our children given your physical limitations." The words hit Sarah like ice water in her veins. She had expected this conversation eventually, had prepared herself for it countless times in her mind, but the reality of hearing those words spoken aloud in front of her students felt like a betrayal of the sanctuary she had worked so hard to create. "I can assure you that my disability has never interfered with my ability to provide excellent care for the children," Sarah responded, her professional training taking over, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "But what if there's an emergency?" Karen pressed, her voice rising slightly. "What if a child runs into traffic, or there's a fire, or someone gets hurt on the playground? Can you honestly tell me you could respond as quickly as a normal teacher?" The word normal hung in the air like a slap. Sarah felt the familiar sting of that word, the way it reduced her entire identity to what she lacked rather than what she possessed. Around them, children had stopped their activities, sensing the adult conflict with the radar-like sensitivity that only young children possessed. Tommy appeared at Sarah's side, his small hand finding hers with the instinctive loyalty of a child who recognized injustice, even when he couldn't name it. "Miss Sarah takes super good care of us," he announced, his young voice ringing with conviction. "She helped me when I fell down and didn't cry, even though her robot leg makes it hard to bend down." Other children began to gather around Sarah's desk, forming an unconscious protective circle around their teacher. Lily clutched her favorite stuffed animal, a one-eyed teddy bear that Sarah had taught her to love despite its imperfections. Marcus stood with his arms crossed, wearing the serious expression he reserved for moments when he felt something was deeply wrong. Karen looked around at the assembled children, clearly uncomfortable with the audience her confrontation had attracted. Her face flushed red as she realized her words had been overheard by the very children she claimed to be protecting. "This isn't a discussion for little ears," she said, backing toward the door. "But Mrs. Martinez, you'll be hearing from other parents about this. We just want what's best for our children." As Karen left, pulling Emma along behind her, Sarah felt the weight of what had just occurred settling over the classroom like a heavy blanket. The children looked up at her with questions in their eyes, questions she wasn't sure how to answer without betraying her own hurt and confusion. "Miss Sarah, are you okay?" Emma had broken free from her mother's grasp and run back to Sarah's side. Her small face was etched with worry beyond her 4 years. Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, ignoring the mechanical whir of her prosthetic as it adjusted to the movement. She placed gentle hands on the little girl's shoulders, looking into eyes that held the same brown warmth as her own. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups worry about things they don't understand. But you know what? That's what makes our classroom so special. We learn about differences, and we celebrate them. Like how Marcus is really good at math, but I'm good at art?" Lily asked, her pigtails bobbing as she nodded. "Exactly like that," Sarah smiled, though it took effort to make it reach her eyes. "We're all good at different things, and we're all special in different ways." But as the morning progressed, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. She noticed parents lingering longer at pickup time, their conversations stopping when she appeared. She saw the way some children seemed more hesitant to approach her, as if their parents' concerns had planted seeds of doubt in their young minds. During nap time, as the classroom fell quiet except for the soft sounds of sleeping children, Sarah sat at her desk staring at Tommy's drawing. The silver-legged figure smiled back at her from the construction paper, a reminder of how children saw the world before adults taught them to fear differences. Maria Gonzalez appeared in the doorway, her face wearing the expression of someone bearing difficult news. As the daycare director, Maria had been Sarah's champion since the day she was hired 3 years ago. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, but today it seemed to frame a face etched with worry. "Sarah, we need to talk," Maria whispered, careful not to wake the sleeping children. They moved to the small break room, where the coffee maker gurgled its afternoon rhythm, and the walls were covered with employee schedules and safety reminders. Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee with hands that trembled slightly, the morning's confrontation having left her more shaken than she wanted to admit. "I heard about what happened with Karen Williams this morning," Maria began, settling into the plastic chair across from Sarah. "And I need to tell you, she's not the only parent who's expressed concerns." Sarah's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "How many others?" "7 families have called me in the past week. They are asking questions about your ability to handle emergencies, about liability issues, about whether it's appropriate to have a teacher with physical limitations working with young children." The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. 7 families out of 22 in her class. Nearly a third of her students' parents questioning her competence, her ability to do the job she loved more than anything else in the world. "What did you tell them?" Sarah's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I told them the truth, that you're the most dedicated teacher we've ever had, that the children adore you, and that in 3 years you've never had a single incident. I told them that heart matters more than physical ability when it comes to caring for children." Sarah stared into her coffee, seeing her reflection wavering in the dark liquid. "But they're not satisfied with that answer. Some are. Mrs. Patterson came to your defense," said her son. "David has never been happier in school. The Johnsons called to express their support. But the others," Maria's voice trailed off, "the others want me gone. They want reassurances I can't give them. They want guarantees about situations that haven't happened and may never happen. They want perfection in an imperfect world." Sarah set down her coffee cup and looked out the small window that faced the playground. Children from the older classes were outside, running and laughing, their voices carrying on the autumn breeze. She watched them play, remembering her own childhood before the accident that changed everything, before she learned that the world could be a place where your worth was measured by your limitations rather than your strengths. "Maria, maybe they're right. Maybe I am putting the children at risk by pretending I can do everything a non-disabled teacher can do. Don't you dare." Maria's voice carried a fierceness that surprised both of them. "Don't you dare let their fear make you doubt yourself. You know what you're capable of. More importantly, those children know what you're capable of." But even as Maria spoke words of support, Sarah felt the familiar weight of doubt settling over her like an old, unwelcome friend. It was the same doubt that had followed her through college when professors questioned whether she should really pursue education. The same doubt that had made finding her first teaching job a series of rejections and closed doors. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment grading papers and preparing lessons for the next day. The walls around her told the story of her teaching career, photographs with countless classes of children, thank you cards from grateful parents, and certificates of achievement that proved her dedication to her profession. But tonight, surrounded by the evidence of her success, she felt more alone than ever. Her phone rang, and she saw her sister Lucia's number on the screen. Lucia had been her anchor through every difficult moment since the accident 15 years ago. the one person who never saw her as anything other than whole. Hermana, how was your day? Lucia's warm voice carried across the miles from her home in Chicago. It's been better, Sarah admitted, settling back into her couch. Some parents are questioning whether I should be teaching their children. Because of your leg? Lucia's voice carried immediate understanding and anger. Because of what they think my leg means about my abilities. They're scared I can't protect their children in an emergency. And what do you think? It was such a simple question, but it cut straight to the heart of Sarah's deepest fears. What did she think? Could she honestly say she was as capable as any other teacher? Could she run as fast, react as quickly, physically intervene if needed? I think I love those children more than anything in the world, and I would do anything to keep them safe. But I can't ignore the reality that there are things I can't do as easily as other people. Sarah, do you remember what happened when you were learning to walk with your prosthetic? I fell down a lot. And what did you do every time you fell? I got back up. That's right. You got back up. And eventually you didn't fall anymore. Those parents don't understand that strength isn't about having two biological legs. It's about having the courage to get back up every time life knocks you down. After hanging up with Lucia, Sarah walked to her bedroom and stood before the full-length mirror mounted on the closet door. She raised her skirt and looked at the prosthetic that had been part of her life for so long, it felt more like an extension of herself than a foreign object. The metal and polymer construction was a marvel of engineering, designed to give her mobility and independence. But tonight, it felt like a symbol of everything that set her apart from the world around her. She touched the prosthetic gently, remembering the months of physical therapy, the tears of frustration, the small victories that eventually led to larger ones. She remembered the first time she walked without falling, the first time she climbed stairs, the first time she danced at her cousin's wedding. Each milestone had been a testament to her determination to live fully despite her limitations. But were those limitations putting children at risk? The question haunted her as she prepared for bed, as she lay staring at the ceiling listening to the night sounds of her neighborhood. Somewhere out there, parents were discussing her fitness to teach their children. Somewhere out there, people were reducing her entire identity to the things she was missing rather than celebrating everything she had to offer. The next morning brought new challenges and small victories in equal measure. As Sarah greeted her students at the classroom door, she noticed subtle changes in their behavior. Some children seemed more hesitant to approach her, while others, like Tommy and Lily, were more affectionate than usual, as if sensing she needed extra love. During circle time, when the children shared news from home, Emma raised her hand hesitantly. "Miss Sarah, my mommy says you might not be our teacher much longer." The question hung in the air like a thundercloud, and Sarah felt 22 pairs of young eyes fixed on her face. She took a deep breath, calling upon every ounce of her professional training to respond appropriately. "Sometimes grown-ups worry about things that children don't need to worry about," Sarah said carefully. "What I can tell you is that I love being your teacher, and I love each one of you very much." "But are you going away?" Tommy's voice carried the tremor of a child who had experienced loss before. "I'm here today, and I'm planning to be here tomorrow. That's what I can promise you right now." It wasn't the reassurance the children wanted, and Sarah knew it. She could see the confusion and fear in their faces, the way they tried to process adult concepts with their young minds. She had built a classroom culture based on honesty and trust, and now she found herself unable to give them the certainty they craved. During outdoor playtime, Sarah positioned herself on a bench near the playground equipment, watching as the children played. Her usual routine involved walking among them, joining in their games, being an active participant in their exploration of the world. But today, she found herself more cautious, more aware of her movements, second-guessing every decision. When Marcus fell from the monkey bars and scraped his knee, Sarah's first instinct was to rush to him. But she hesitated for a crucial moment, wondering if parents were watching, if they would see her slightly awkward gait as evidence of her inadequacy. By the time she reached Marcus, another teacher had already arrived to help. "I could have handled it," Sarah told Jennifer, her fellow teacher who had responded to Marcus's cry for help. "I know you could have," Jennifer replied, but something in her voice suggested she had noticed Sarah's hesitation. "Are you okay? You seem different today." Sarah wanted to confide in Jennifer, to share the burden of doubt that was weighing her down. But how could she explain that she was questioning everything about herself, that the job she had loved with her whole heart was becoming a source of anxiety and self-doubt. That afternoon brought a visit from Dr. Elizabeth Hunter, the district's special education coordinator. Sarah had worked with Dr. Hunter on several occasions, collaborating to support children with diverse learning needs. But today, Dr. Hunter's presence felt different, more official. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind the unscheduled visit," Dr. Hunter said as she entered the classroom. "I wanted to check in and see how things are going." They watched as the children engaged in their afternoon activities, painting at easels, building with blocks, reading quietly in the library corner. To an outside observer, it was a perfect picture of early childhood education in action. Children were engaged, happy, and learning. Sarah moved among them with practiced ease, offering encouragement, asking questions, facilitating their discoveries. "The children seem very comfortable with you," Dr. Hunter observed. "We've built strong relationships over the course of the year," Sarah replied, helping Lily clean paint from her hands. "They know they can trust me to keep them safe and support their learning. I've heard there have been some concerns raised by parents." Sarah's hands stilled on the paper towel she was using to clean Lily's fingers. "Some parents have expressed worries about emergency situations." "And how do you respond to those concerns?" It was the question Sarah had been dreading, the one that forced her to confront her own doubts and fears. She looked around the classroom at the children who had become such an important part of her life, children who saw her not as disabled, but as their beloved teacher. "I respond by pointing to my track record," Sarah said finally. 3 years of teaching without a single incident. Children who are happy, healthy, and learning. Parents who have expressed gratitude for the care and education I provide. I respond by being the best teacher I can be, every single day." Dr. Hunter made notes in her folder, her expression unreadable. "The district supports teachers with disabilities, Sarah. We believe in accommodation and inclusion, but we also have to address legitimate safety concerns when they're raised." "Are you questioning my competence?" "I'm asking you to help us understand how you would handle various emergency scenarios. It's not about your competence as a teacher. It's about ensuring we can address parent concerns with concrete information." That evening, Sarah found herself surrounded by emergency procedure manuals, safety protocols, and incident response guides. She practiced evacuation routes, timed herself walking from various points in the building to the exits, and researched adaptive equipment that might help her respond more quickly in crisis situations. But as she worked, a part of her wondered if this was what teaching had become for her. Not the joy of nurturing young minds and hearts, but an endless process of proving she deserved to be there. She thought about her childhood dreams of becoming a teacher, dreams that had sustained her through the darkest days of her recovery. Had those dreams accounted for spending evenings justifying her existence in the profession she loved? Her reflection was interrupted by a knock at her apartment door. When she opened it, she found Maria standing in the hallway, holding a bottle of wine and wearing an expression of determination. "We need to talk," Maria announced, pushing past Sarah into the apartment. They sat on Sarah's couch, surrounded by the emergency manuals and safety guides that had consumed her evening. Maria picked up one of the documents and shook her head. "This isn't what teaching should be about," Maria said. "You shouldn't have to spend your evenings proving you have the right to do the job you're already doing excellently. But maybe I do need to prove it. Maybe I've been so focused on what I want that I haven't considered what's best for the children. Sarah, look at me." Maria's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades in education. "In all my years as an administrator, I have never seen children respond to a teacher the way your students respond to you. They don't just respect you, they love you. They don't just learn from you, they're inspired by you." "But what if something happens? What if there's an emergency and I can't respond quickly enough? What if a meteor hits the building? What if aliens invade? What if the Earth stops spinning? We can't live our lives preparing for every possible catastrophe. We can only do our best with the tools we have." Sarah set down her wine glass and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that stretched toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, 22 children were sleeping in their beds, trusting that tomorrow would bring another day of learning and growth. Somewhere out there, parents were lying awake worrying about hypothetical dangers while overlooking the very real love and dedication their children received every day. "I keep thinking about what Tommy said when he included me in his family drawing," Sarah said softly. "He called my prosthetic a robot leg and thought it was the coolest thing in the world. To him, it makes me special, not less capable." Children see truth more clearly than adults sometimes, Maria replied. They haven't learned to be afraid of differences yet. But their parents have. And those parents vote for school board members, donate to school fundraisers, and have the power to make my life very difficult. Some parents, not all. And even the ones who are concerned now might change their minds if given the chance to see what you really offer these children. Sarah returned to the couch and picked up Tommy's drawing, which she had brought home to laminate and preserve. The stick figure with the shining silver legs smiled back at her, a reminder of innocence and acceptance that seemed increasingly rare in the adult world. "What would you do if you were me?" Sarah asked. "I would remember why I became a teacher in the first place. I would remember that the best teachers aren't the ones who never face challenges, but the ones who overcome them. And I would trust that the truth has a way of revealing itself when it matters most." As the week progressed, the tension around Sarah's presence in the classroom continued to build. More parents requested meetings with Maria. A local parent organized a discussion group about safety standards in early childhood education. Someone created a Facebook group that, while not mentioning Sarah by name, clearly referenced concerns about teachers with physical disabilities. But there were also signs of support that Sarah tried to hold on to like lifelines in a storm. Mrs. Patterson sent a beautiful note expressing gratitude for Sarah's influence on her son David, who had started asking questions about differences and acceptance that led to meaningful family conversations. The Johnsons brought cookies and a card signed by their whole family. Tommy's mother called to say that her son talked about Sarah constantly at home, always with love and admiration. During this time, Sarah found herself hyper-aware of every movement, every interaction, every moment when her prosthetic might be noticed or her limitations might be exposed. She second-guessed decisions she had made confidently for years, questioned her instincts, and felt the joy she had always found in teaching beginning to dim under the weight of constant scrutiny. But the children remained her anchor. They continued to run to her with their discoveries, their problems, their celebrations. They still fought for the privilege of sitting next to her during story time. They still decorated cards with her name and drew pictures that included her metallic leg as a badge of honor rather than shame. One afternoon, as Sarah was cleaning up after art time, she overheard a conversation between Emma and a new student named Alex, whose family had recently moved to town. "Why does Miss Sarah walk funny?" Alex asked with the blunt curiosity of a 4-year-old. "She has a robot leg," Emma explained matter-of-factly. "It makes her super strong. My mama used to think it was scary, but now she knows Miss Sarah is the best teacher ever." "Can I touch it?" "You have to ask her first. She doesn't mind explaining it if you're nice about it." The conversation filled Sarah with a complex mix of emotions. Pride in Emma's mature response, gratitude for her acceptance, but also sadness that such conversations were necessary at all. She wondered what kind of world she was preparing these children for, a world where differences were met with suspicion rather than curiosity, fear rather than acceptance. That evening, as Sarah was leaving the daycare center, she encountered Karen Williams in the parking lot. Karen was getting Emma out of her car for some after-hours event, and both women froze when they saw each other. "Mrs. Martinez," Karen said, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge, "I wanted to... Emma talks about you constantly at home." "She's a wonderful little girl," Sarah replied carefully. "Very bright and creative. She drew a picture of you yesterday, with the prosthetic leg. She was so proud of it, kept saying you were the most beautiful teacher in the world." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. Children see beauty differently than adults sometimes. Karen looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "I want you to know that this isn't personal. I don't have anything against you, you want to protect your daughter. I understand that completely. But maybe I've been thinking about this wrong. Emma has never been happier in school. She wakes up excited to see you every day. And when I really think about it, isn't that what matters most?" It was the first crack in the wall of opposition Sarah had been facing, and she felt a small flame of hope flicker to life in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, minds could be changed. Maybe hearts could be opened. Maybe the truth that Maria spoke of really would reveal itself when it mattered most. But even as hope began to grow, Sarah knew that the real test was still coming. Somewhere in the distance, she could sense that the universe was preparing a moment that would define not just her career, but everything she believed about her own worth and capabilities. A moment that would prove, once and for all, whether the concerns about her limitations were justified or whether the love and dedication she brought to her work were worth more than perfect physical ability. As she drove home that night, Sarah whispered a prayer to whatever forces guide the universe, asking not for ease, but for strength, asking not for the absence of challenges, but for the courage to meet them head on, asking not to be judged by what she lacked, but by what she had to offer. The answer to that prayer was coming sooner than she could have imagined, in a form that would test every assumption, challenge every prejudice, and reveal the true meaning of heroism in ways that would change not just her own life, but the lives of everyone who witnessed what unfolded next. But that is a story for another day, when the smoke cleared and the truth shone brighter than anyone could have possibly expected. Sarah Martinez thought she had faced the worst when cruel parents questioned her ability to protect their children. But what happened next would test her resolve in ways that would forever change not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. And what you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about courage, prejudice, and what it truly means to be a hero. Comment below if you've ever been judged unfairly, because this story will remind you that sometimes our greatest weaknesses become our most powerful strengths. The morning air felt different when Sarah arrived at Sunshine Daycare the next day. Something had shifted overnight, like the moment before a storm when the atmosphere grows heavy and electric. She could sense it the moment she stepped through the cheerfully painted doors that now seemed to mock her with their false promise of acceptance. The sweet scent of finger paints and apple juice that usually welcomed her felt tainted, contaminated by whispered conversations and sideways glances. In the teacher's lounge, Sarah discovered a folded piece of paper tucked under her nameplate. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded it, revealing anonymous handwriting that cut through her like shattered glass. Children deserve teachers who can actually protect them. The words blurred as tears threatened to fall, each letter a tiny dagger aimed at her heart. She quickly crumpled the note, but the damage was done. The poison had been planted. Jennifer Park, her closest colleague and friend, burst through the door with her phone in hand, her usually calm demeanor replaced by righteous fury. Her dark eyes flashed with indignation as she held up the glowing screen, revealing a Facebook post that made Sarah's stomach drop like a stone into a bottomless pit. Should we allow physically disabled individuals to care for our children in emergency situations? The post had already garnered dozens of comments, each one a virtual slap across Sarah's face. Parents she had worked with for years, people who had once praised her dedication, were now questioning her basic humanity. The comments ranged from false concern masked as protection to outright discrimination wrapped in the thin veneer of parental responsibility. But Sarah straightened her shoulders, feeling the familiar weight of her prosthetic leg like armor against the world's cruelty. She had faced bullets of doubt before and survived. She would not let anonymous cowards and keyboard warriors destroy what she had spent years building. The children needed her, and she would prove that her heart was stronger than any weakness they perceived in her body. The classroom felt different when she entered, as if the very walls had absorbed the tension from the outside world. But then, Tommy's face lit up like a sunrise when he saw her, and for a moment, everything else faded away. These children, these beautiful, innocent souls, saw her as she truly was, not disabled, not limited, simply Miss Sarah, who read them stories and helped them paint masterpieces and believed in their dreams even when the world told them they were too small to matter. As she helped little Emma with her alphabet blocks, Sarah noticed the hesitation in the child's movements, the way Emma glanced toward the door as if expecting her mother to appear and snatch her away from danger. It broke Sarah's heart to realize that the poison of adult prejudice was already seeping into these pure young minds like ink spreading through clear water. The morning proceeded with deceptive normalcy until the classroom door swung open with the force of judgment itself. Karen Williams entered like a general preparing for battle, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum floor with military precision. Behind her stood Robert Chen, another parent whose face wore the uncomfortable expression of someone who knew they were about to cause pain but felt justified in doing so. "Miss Martinez?" Karen's voice carried the false politeness of someone trying to appear reasonable while delivering a devastating blow. "We need to discuss the situation with other concerned parents." The children sensed the tension immediately, their innocent games forgotten as they turned to watch the adult drama unfold. Sarah felt their eyes on her like spotlights, and she knew that whatever happened in the next few minutes would teach them more about the world than any lesson plan ever could. Would they learn that different meant dangerous, or would they discover that courage comes in many forms? Karen's words continued to flow like poison honey, sweet on the surface but deadly underneath. We've spoken with several other families, and there's a consensus that we need to address the safety concerns regarding your condition. The pause before that final word hit Sarah like a physical blow. Not disability, not challenge, condition. As if she were a disease to be quarantined rather than a human being to be respected. Robert Chen shifted uncomfortably, his conscience clearly warring with his prejudice. "Look, we don't want to be unreasonable," he said, his voice lacking the conviction of his words. "But our children's safety has to come first. What if there's an emergency? What if someone gets hurt and you can't respond quickly enough?" Sarah felt the familiar fire ignite in her chest, the same flame that had carried her through years of physical therapy, through college courses where professors doubted her abilities, through job interviews where she had to prove her worth before she even spoke a word. But this time was different. This time, the attack wasn't just on her. It was on every child who had ever felt different, every person who had ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character. "I understand your concerns," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her heart. "But in 3 years of teaching here, there has never been a single incident under my supervision. Not one scraped knee that wasn't properly treated, not one emotional crisis that wasn't handled with care, not one moment where any child was unsafe in my presence." But her words seemed to bounce off the wall of predetermined judgment that Karen and Robert had built around themselves. They had already made their decision, and no amount of evidence or logic would change their minds. They saw only what they wanted to see: limitation, weakness, liability. Little Lily suddenly spoke up from where she sat coloring at the art table, her 4-year-old voice cutting through the adult tension like a sword of truth. "Miss Sarah takes the best care of us. She helped me when I was scared of the dark, and she taught Marcus how to tie his shoes, and she always knows when we're sad before we even cry." Tommy nodded vigorously, his small hand reaching out to touch Sarah's arm in a gesture of pure loyalty. "Miss Sarah is the best teacher ever. She's not scary or dangerous. She's nice and smart, and she makes the best funny voices when she reads stories." Karen's face flushed with embarrassment at being contradicted by children, but her resolve didn't waver. "Kids don't understand these things," she said dismissively, as if the very people Sarah cared for daily had no right to defend her. "They can't comprehend the real dangers." As the confrontation continued, Sarah noticed Emma Williams sitting quietly in the corner, her small face a mask of confusion and sadness. The little girl who had once run to hug Sarah's legs every morning now seemed afraid to get too close, poisoned by her mother's fear and prejudice. It was a heartbreak beyond measure to watch innocence being corrupted by adult ignorance. The arguing voices faded into background noise as Sarah focused on Emma's troubled expression. She made a mental note to have a gentle conversation with the child later, to somehow counteract the damage that was being done to her young mind. Children learned about the world by watching the adults around them, and right now Emma was learning that difference meant danger and that love could be conditional. When Karen and Robert finally left, their threats hanging in the air like storm clouds, Sarah sank into her chair feeling emotionally battered but not broken. The children gathered around her instinctively, their young hearts understanding what their minds couldn't fully grasp, that their beloved teacher was under attack, and they wanted to protect her just as she had always protected them. The rest of the day passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Sarah went through the motions of teaching and caring, but she could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. During recess, she overheard snippets of conversation between other parents who had come to pick up their children early, their whispered words carrying clearly across the playground. "I heard she can barely walk properly. What if there's a fire? How could she carry the children to safety? My husband says we should transfer Madison to another daycare." Each comment was another nail in the coffin of her career, another vote of no confidence in her ability to do the job she loved more than life itself. But it was the children's confused questions that hurt the most. "Miss Sarah, why was Emma's mommy angry at you?" asked Marcus during snack time, his innocent eyes wide with concern. "Some grown-ups get scared when people are different," Sarah explained carefully, choosing her words like a surgeon selecting instruments. They think different means dangerous, but we know that's not true, don't we? Different is special, declared Lily with the absolute certainty that only a child could possess. You taught us that. But even as Sarah smiled at Lily's fierce loyalty, she could see the seeds of doubt beginning to sprout in some of the other children's minds. A few who had once clamored for her attention now hung back slightly, their parents' fears beginning to infect their pure hearts like a slow-acting poison. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment surrounded by the evidence of her life's work. Photo albums filled with pictures of hundreds of children she had taught, thank you cards from grateful parents, artwork that former students had made for her over the years. Each item told the story of lives touched, minds shaped, hearts opened. How could years of dedication and success be overshadowed by prejudice and fear? Her phone rang, and she saw Maria's name on the caller ID. Sarah's heart sank, knowing that her boss wouldn't be calling with good news at this hour. "Sarah?" Maria's voice was heavy with exhaustion and frustration. "I've just finished a 2-hour meeting with the school board. 7 families have formally requested that you be transferred to a different position or—" She paused, unable to finish the sentence. "Or fired," Sarah completed the thought, her voice surprisingly steady. "I fought for you. I presented your performance reviews, your safety record, testimonials from other parents. But they're scared, Sarah. Scared of lawsuits, scared of bad publicity, scared of losing enrollment if this controversy continues to grow." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the walls of her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around her. What did the board decide? They gave you 2 weeks. 2 weeks to prove that the concerns are unfounded, or they'll have to make a decision that none of us wants them to make. 2 weeks, 14 days to prove her worth, to demonstrate that her heart was stronger than any perceived weakness in her body, to show that love and dedication mattered more than the ability to run at full speed. It seemed impossible, but Sarah had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. After hanging up the phone, she walked to her bathroom mirror and looked at her reflection. Really looked at it for the first time in months. She saw the worry lines around her eyes, the weight of constant judgment on her shoulders, the toll that fighting for acceptance had taken on her spirit. But she also saw something else, the same fire that had burned in her eyes as a child when she first put on her prosthetic leg and declared that nothing would stop her from becoming a teacher. That night, Sarah lay awake planning her strategy. She would document every interaction, every moment of care she provided to the children. She would gather testimonials from former students and their families. She would prove through actions rather than words that her disability was not a liability, but a source of strength, teaching children lessons about acceptance and perseverance that no textbook could provide. But even as she planned her defense, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts. What if they were right? What if she really couldn't protect the children in a true emergency? What if her desire to prove herself put innocent lives at risk? The questions tormented her through the long, sleepless night, each doubt a tiny crack in the armor of her confidence. As dawn broke over the city, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She would not just defend herself, she would go on the offensive. She would show everyone, supporters and detractors alike, exactly what she was capable of. She would prove that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, that strength isn't measured in speed or mobility, but in courage and determination. Little did she know that fate was about to give her the chance to prove herself in ways she never could have imagined, and that the very people who doubted her would soon witness firsthand why the children called her their hero. The test was coming, and Sarah Martinez was ready to face it head-on, no matter what the cost. But first, she had to survive the growing storm of prejudice and fear that threatened to destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. The battle for her career was about to become a battle for her very identity, and the stakes had never been higher. The afternoon air hung thick with tension at Sunshine Daycare, carrying the innocent laughter of children who had no idea their world was about to change forever. Sarah Martinez adjusted her prosthetic leg one final time as she prepared snacks in the small kitchen, her movements precise and practiced after years of adaptation. The familiar weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a comfortable blanket, each sound from the classrooms a symphony of normalcy she'd grown to treasure. But normalcy, as Sarah would soon discover, was about to shatter into 1,000 burning pieces. The first whiff of smoke curled through the air like a serpent, so subtle that Sarah almost dismissed it as someone burning toast. Her nostrils flared slightly, years of hypervigilance as a disabled teacher making her more attuned to potential dangers than most. She paused, apple slices halfway to a plate, and inhaled deeply. The acrid smell hit her consciousness like a sledgehammer, sending ice-cold adrenaline coursing through her veins. This wasn't burnt food. This was something far more sinister. "Oh my God," she whispered, dropping the knife with a clatter that seemed to echo through the sudden stillness. Sarah moved toward the kitchen window with quick, determined steps, her prosthetic clicking against the linoleum in a rhythm that had become as natural as breathing. What she saw through the glass made her blood freeze. Thick gray smoke was billowing from the basement maintenance room, climbing the exterior walls like hungry fingers reaching for the innocent children inside. The sight triggered every protective instinct she possessed, transforming her from concerned teacher to fierce guardian in a heartbeat. "Maria!" she screamed, her voice cracking with urgency. "Fire! Fire in the building!" The ear-splitting shriek of the fire alarm shattered the peaceful afternoon, its mechanical wail mixing with the immediate chaos that erupted throughout the daycare. Children's voices rose in confusion and terror, their innocent questions turning to frightened cries as teachers rushed to implement emergency procedures they'd hoped never to use. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched smoke begin seeping through the ventilation system, turning their safe haven into a potential death trap. In the main hallway, pandemonium reigned. Teachers emerged from classrooms like soldiers responding to battle stations, their faces etched with controlled panic as they gathered children with practiced efficiency. Maria's voice boomed through the building's intercom system, steady despite the circumstances. "All staff, initiate emergency evacuation procedures immediately. This is not a drill." Jennifer appeared at Sarah's side, her face pale but determined. "Sarah, we need to get your kids out now. The smoke is getting worse." But Sarah was already moving, her mind calculating with crystal clarity. 12 children in her classroom, 12 precious lives depending on her ability to guide them to safety. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same parents who'd questioned her capability were now counting on her to save what mattered most to them. As she hurried toward her classroom, each step of her prosthetic against the floor sounded like a war drum, marking the rhythm of her determination. The scene in her classroom was heartbreaking. 12 small faces turned toward her with absolute trust, their eyes wide with fear but looking to her for answers. Tommy clutched his favorite crayon so tightly his knuckles were white. Emma had tears streaming down her cheeks, while Marcus tried to comfort Lily, who was shaking like a leaf. These weren't just her students anymore. They were her children, and she would move heaven and earth to protect them. "All right, my brave little heroes," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Remember our fire safety game? Today we get to play it for real, and you all know exactly what to do." Tommy's lower lip trembled as he raised his hand. "Miss Sarah, I'm really scared." "That sound is so loud." Sarah knelt down, bringing herself to their eye level, her prosthetic folding beneath her with practiced ease. "I know, sweetheart. Being scared is okay. Even grown-ups get scared sometimes. But you know what makes us brave?" "What?" whispered Emma, her voice barely audible above the alarm. "Being scared, but doing the right thing anyway. And right now, the right thing is to stay together and help each other get outside safely." Sarah began organizing the children with military precision, her years of experience and preparation crystallizing into action. She lifted Emma into her arms, the little girl's weight familiar and precious, while gesturing for the others to form their practiced evacuation line. Each child grabbed the shoulder of the one in front, creating a human chain of trust and courage. "Tommy, you're my line leader today," Sarah announced, pinning a special badge on his shirt. "Can you handle that big responsibility?" Tommy straightened his shoulders, pride momentarily overriding his fear. "Yes, Miss Sarah." As they moved toward the door, Sarah caught sight of herself in the classroom mirror. Her reflection showed a woman transformed by purpose, her prosthetic leg no longer something to hide but simply another tool in her arsenal of determination. The same device that parents had seen as a limitation was about to become part of her greatest act of courage. The hallway was a maze of smoke and confusion. Other classes had already evacuated, their voices echoing from the safety of the outdoor assembly point. But Sarah's group was among the last, their classroom location making escape more challenging. The acrid smell burned her nostrils and throat, but she pushed forward, her small convoy of children following with unwavering trust. "Stay low, everyone," Sarah instructed, remembering her safety training. "The air is cleaner down here." and keep holding on to each other no matter what. They moved through the hazy corridor like a determined caterpillar, Sarah's prosthetic tapping out a steady rhythm that somehow became comforting rather than alarming. Each step was a small victory, each breath a gift she wouldn't take for granted. Behind them, she could hear the approaching sirens of fire trucks, but she knew they couldn't wait for professional rescue. These children needed her now. The main exit loomed ahead, blessed relief just yards away, when disaster struck. A section of dropped ceiling tiles crashed down, blocking their primary escape route with a thunderous crash that made several children scream. Dust and debris filled the air, mixing with the smoke to create an almost impenetrable haze. "Change of plans, heroes," Sarah announced, her voice remarkably calm despite the racing of her heart. "We're taking the scenic route through the back exit." "It'll be like exploring a secret passage." Marcus tugged on her skirt. "Miss Sarah, are you okay? You're breathing funny." The smoke was definitely affecting her now, each inhalation burning her lungs and throat. But she forced a smile and ruffled his hair. "I'm perfect, sweetie. Just excited about our adventure." Turning toward the rear of the building, Sarah led her precious cargo through corridors she'd walked thousands of times, but which now felt foreign and threatening. The smoke was thicker here, forcing her to feel along the walls for guidance. Her prosthetic made navigation more challenging, but she refused to let it slow her down. Not today. Not when these children needed her most. "Miss Sarah?" Lily called out, her voice muffled by the makeshift mask Sarah had told them to make with their shirts. "I can barely see anything." "That's okay, sweetheart," Sarah replied, fighting back a cough. "Sometimes we have to trust our other senses. Listen to my voice, feel the person in front of you, and trust that we're going exactly where we need to go." The rear exit appeared through the haze like a beacon of hope, its red exit sign glowing through the smoke-filled darkness. Sarah's heart soared as she pushed open the door, cool, fresh air rushing in to greet them like a loving embrace. But her relief was premature. As they emerged into the daylight, Sarah realized with growing horror that they'd exited on the side of the building where no one was expecting them. The main evacuation area was on the opposite side, where parents and emergency responders were gathering. Worse, she could see that several parents were becoming increasingly frantic, not seeing their children among the evacuated groups. "Stay right here," she instructed the children, seating them against the building's exterior wall. "I need to let everyone know you're safe." Sarah began making her way around the building, her prosthetic making the uneven ground challenging but not impossible. Each step sent jolts of pain through her residual limb, the emergency evacuation having pushed her body beyond its normal limits. But physical discomfort paled in comparison to the emotional urgency driving her forward. The scene at the main evacuation point was controlled chaos. Fire trucks had arrived, their flashing lights painting everything in shades of red and orange. Parents searched desperately among the assembled children, teachers conducting head counts with clipboards that shook in their hands. Sarah could see Karen Williams frantically scanning the crowd, her face etched with the kind of terror only a parent could understand. "Everyone," Sarah called out, as loudly as her smoke-damaged voice would allow. "I have 12 children safe at the rear exit." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Parents rushed toward her voice like iron filings drawn to a magnet, hope and desperation written across their faces in equal measure. Maria appeared at her side, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. "Sarah, thank God! Are they all okay?" "Every single one," Sarah confirmed, though her voice was growing more hoarse by the minute. "Emma, Tommy, Marcus, Lily, all of them. They're safe." Karen Williams reached her first, her perfectly composed exterior completely shattered by maternal fear. "Emma? Is Emma really okay?" "She's been asking for you," Sarah replied, pointing toward the rear of the building. "She was so brave." They all were. The reunion that followed was pure emotional chaos. Children ran into their parents' arms, while adults who had questioned Sarah's abilities just days before now looked at her with something approaching awe. But Sarah wasn't finished. As the initial relief subsided, she began conducting her own head count, her teacher's instincts overriding her physical exhaustion. "Wait," she said suddenly, her blood running cold. "Where's Rebecca?" Rebecca Chen, Robert's 5-year-old daughter, was nowhere to be seen among the evacuated children. Sarah's heart stopped as she realized the little girl must still be inside the building, possibly hiding in fear or overcome by smoke. "Rebecca was in the bathroom when the alarm started," Jennifer reported, her face going pale. "I thought she'd already come out with another group." Without hesitation, Sarah turned back toward the building, but a firefighter immediately blocked her path. "Ma'am, the building isn't safe for civilians. We'll find her." "You don't understand," Sarah said firmly, her voice carrying an authority that made the firefighter pause. "Rebecca has autism. She gets overwhelmed by loud noises and bright lights. When she's scared, she hides in small spaces. She won't come out for strangers, especially not in gear like that." The firefighter looked uncertain, glancing between Sarah and his captain for guidance. "She knows me," Sarah continued. "She trusts me. I can find her faster than anyone else." Robert Chen appeared at her shoulder, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. "Please," he said to the firefighter. "If Miss Martinez thinks she can find Rebecca, let her try. She knows my daughter better than anyone here." The fire captain approached, his expression grave. "The smoke is getting worse, and we have reports of structural damage on the second floor. I can't authorize a civilian entry." Sarah looked directly into his eyes, her gaze unwavering despite her obvious exhaustion. "Captain, I've spent 3 years learning every hiding spot in that building. I know where she is, and I know how to reach her safely. Every minute we waste is a minute she's breathing smoke." Something in Sarah's tone, or perhaps the desperate plea of a father, convinced him. "You have 5 minutes," he said finally, "and you take one of my men with you." "No," Sarah replied firmly. "The gear and the helmet will terrify her more. I go alone, or she stays hidden." Before anyone could protest further, Sarah was moving back toward the building, her prosthetic clicking against the pavement in a rhythm that had become her signature sound. Behind her, she could hear Robert Chen calling out encouragement, Karen Williams whispering what might have been a prayer, and Maria shouting for her to be careful. The interior of the building had deteriorated significantly in just the few minutes since her first evacuation. Smoke hung like a thick curtain, and the temperature had risen noticeably. Sarah covered her nose and mouth with her shirt, squinting through the haze as she made her way toward the bathroom area where Rebecca was last seen. "Rebecca!" she called out, her voice echoing strangely in the smoke-filled corridors. "It's Miss Sarah! Your daddy is looking for you!" The silence that greeted her was more terrifying than screams would have been. Sarah forced herself to think like Rebecca, to remember the child's patterns and preferences. Where would a scared little girl with autism hide in an overwhelming situation like this? The supply closet. Rebecca had hidden there once before during a particularly loud thunderstorm, finding comfort among the familiar textures of paper towels and cleaning supplies. Sarah changed direction, heading toward the small storage area near the bathroom facilities. "Rebecca, sweetheart, it's Miss Sarah," she called again as she approached the closet door. "I know you're scared, but Daddy is waiting for you outside. He has your favorite stuffed elephant." A small sound, barely audible above the building's settling groans, reached her ears. Sarah's heart leaped as she recognized the distinctive humming sound Rebecca made when she was trying to self-soothe. The little girl was indeed in the supply closet, probably curled up in the corner where she felt safest. Sarah opened the closet door slowly, not wanting to startle the child with sudden movements. Sure enough, Rebecca was huddled in the far corner, her hands pressed over her ears, rocking back and forth in the rhythmic motion that helped her cope with overwhelming sensory input. "Hey there, beautiful," Sarah said softly, crouching down despite the protest from her prosthetic leg. "I found you. Everything's going to be okay now." Rebecca's eyes opened, focusing on Sarah's familiar face with visible relief. "Miss Sarah, it's so loud, and it smells bad." "I know, sweetheart, but we're going to fix that right now. Want to take a ride with Miss Sarah to see your daddy?" Sarah gathered Rebecca into her arms, the child's weight familiar and precious. Rebecca immediately wrapped her arms around Sarah's neck, burying her face against her shoulder to block out the overwhelming sensory assault of smoke and sound. "Close your eyes and hold on tight," Sarah instructed as she stood carefully, balancing both Rebecca's weight and her own altered center of gravity. "We're going on a quick adventure, and then you'll be safe with Daddy." The journey back through the smoke-filled building was the longest of Sarah's life. Each step was a monumental effort, her lungs burning with every breath and her prosthetic leg aching from the unusual strain. But Rebecca's trust, evident in the way she clung to Sarah without question, provided strength she didn't know she possessed. Halfway to the exit, Sarah stumbled slightly as her prosthetic caught on a piece of debris. Rebecca tightened her grip, and Sarah could feel the little girl trembling with fear. "Miss Sarah? Are we going to be okay?" "Absolutely," Sarah replied without hesitation, adjusting her grip to ensure Rebecca felt secure. "You know why I'm so sure?" "Why?" "Because we're taking care of each other. That's what families do, and we're family here at school. The exit appeared ahead of them, like the light at the end of a tunnel. Sarah's vision was beginning to blur from smoke inhalation, and each breath was becoming more labored, but she pressed forward with determination born of love. Rebecca's life depended on her ability to take these final steps, to overcome the physical limitations that had been questioned and criticized for so long. As they burst through the door into the blessed fresh air, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Robert Chen was there immediately, tears streaming down his face as he reached for his daughter. "Rebecca! Oh, thank God, Rebecca!" The little girl transferred from Sarah's arms to her father's, immediately beginning to chatter about her hiding place and how Miss Sarah had found her. But Sarah's attention was focused elsewhere, her body finally beginning to register the full extent of what she'd endured. "Sarah!" Maria appeared at her side, worry evident in every line of her face. "You need to sit down. You need medical attention." "All the children," Sarah gasped, her voice barely a whisper now. "Are all the children accounted for?" "Yes," Maria confirmed, guiding Sarah to a nearby bench. "Every single child is safe. Because of you." Sarah's legs gave out then, her prosthetic buckling as she collapsed onto the bench. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the crisis was fading, leaving behind the stark reality of what her body had endured. Her lungs felt like they were filled with sandpaper, each breath a monumental effort that sent spasms of pain through her chest. A paramedic appeared beside her, professional concern evident in his quick assessment. "Ma'am, we need to get you to the hospital immediately. You've inhaled a significant amount of smoke." "The children," Sarah wheezed, trying to protest as they prepared to load her onto a gurney. "I need to make sure they're all okay." "They are," Karen Williams said firmly, appearing at Sarah's side with Emma in her arms. "Every single child is safe because of your courage." Emma leaned forward from her mother's arms, placing a small hand on Sarah's cheek. "Miss Sarah, you really are a superhero, aren't you?" Sarah managed a weak smile, her eyes filling with tears that had nothing to do with the smoke. "We all are, sweetheart. Every person who chooses to help others is a superhero." As the paramedics prepared to transport her to the hospital, Sarah looked around at the assembled crowd. Parents who had questioned her ability to protect their children now watched with obvious admiration and gratitude. Children who had always seen her as simply their beloved teacher now looked at her with awe typically reserved for cartoon heroes. But more than the gratitude and admiration, what moved Sarah most was the sight of the children themselves. Tommy was helping comfort a crying younger child from another class. Emma was sharing her juice box with Marcus. Lily was drawing pictures to give to the firefighters. Rebecca was showing her father how Miss Sarah had carried her to safety, demonstrating the confidence and security she'd felt even in the midst of danger. "You did more than save their lives," Robert Chen said quietly, approaching the gurney before they loaded it into the ambulance. "You showed them what real courage looks like. You showed us all." The hospital stay that followed became a desperate fight for survival. Sarah's lungs had sustained catastrophic damage from smoke inhalation, the toxic fumes having seared her respiratory system beyond what doctors had initially realized. Machines beeped steadily in the intensive care unit, each sound marking another labored breath as her body struggled against the invisible enemy that had invaded her lungs. For 3 days, hope flickered like a candle in the wind. Parents, children, teachers, and community members gathered in the hospital waiting room, creating an impromptu vigil of love and prayer. The same people who had once questioned her abilities now pleaded with God, the universe, anyone who would listen, to spare the woman who had proven herself the greatest hero they'd ever known. Karen Williams was there constantly, bringing Emma and camping out in uncomfortable plastic chairs. Her earlier prejudice had been completely shattered, replaced by desperate guilt and overwhelming gratitude. "She saved my baby," Karen whispered to anyone who would listen. "Emma is alive because of Sarah, and I treated her so terribly. I have to tell her I'm sorry. I have to make this right." On the second day during visiting hours, Sarah briefly regained consciousness. Her voice was barely a whisper, each word a monumental effort, but her eyes still held that familiar warmth that had comforted hundreds of children over the years. Emma approached the bedside with trembling steps, her small hand reaching for Sarah's. "Miss Sarah?" the little girl whispered. "Are you going to be okay?" Sarah's fingers closed weakly around Emma's hand, and she managed the faintest smile. "Sweet Emma, you're so brave. I learned from you, Miss Sarah. You taught me that being different makes you special." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she looked around the room at all the faces gathered there. Children she'd taught, parents she'd served, colleagues who'd become family. With tremendous effort, she whispered words that would echo in their hearts forever. Remember, all of you can be heroes. Don't let anyone tell you you're not enough. Those were Sarah Martinez's final words. That evening, as the sun set over the hospital, her brave heart finally stopped fighting. The machines that had sustained her fell silent, and a community lost its greatest teacher. The news of Sarah's passing spread through the community like ripples in a pond, each person touched by her story carrying the impact to others. The grief was overwhelming, but so was the determination to honor her memory in a way that would capture the magnitude of what she had given them. Within hours of the announcement, an extraordinary tribute began to unfold. It started with Tommy's family, who placed a single white rose on the front steps of Sarah's small apartment. Then Emma's parents arrived with white carnations. Soon, Marcus's family brought white lilies, and Lily's parents contributed white daisies. By evening, Sarah's modest home was transformed into a breathtaking garden of white flowers. Hundreds of parents, children, teachers, and community members had come to pay their respects, each bringing white blooms as a symbol of the purity of Sarah's sacrifice and the innocence she had protected. The fragrance of the flowers filled the air like a gentle benediction, creating a sacred space where grief and gratitude intermingled. Children who had never been in Sarah's class came with their parents, having heard the story of the teacher who proved that heroes come in all forms. Elderly neighbors who had only waved to Sarah in passing brought carefully tended roses from their gardens. Even strangers from neighboring communities arrived, drawn by news reports that had elevated Sarah's story to national attention. The scene was both heartbreaking and beautiful. White petals carpeted the walkway, steps, and porch, creating a path of honor leading to the door of the woman who had shown them all what true courage looked like. Handwritten notes were tucked among the flowers, messages from children in careful printing, and letters from parents whose prejudices had been forever transformed. One note, written in Tommy's distinctive handwriting, read, "Miss Sarah, you taught us that different is special. Now we know that heroes are special too. We love you forever." Emma's family had brought a poster-sized card signed by her entire new class, children who had never met Sarah but had learned her story. "Thank you for showing us that being brave means helping others even when you're scared." The tribute continued for days, with fresh flowers arriving each morning to replace those that had wilted. Local news crews captured the phenomenon, dubbing it the White Garden of Memory, and the image of Sarah's flower-covered home became an iconic symbol of community love and respect. But the most significant honor came 2 weeks later, when the school board held an emergency meeting that was standing room only. Maria stood at the podium, her voice strong despite her obvious emotion. "Sarah Martinez gave her life protecting our children," she announced to the packed auditorium. "She showed us that the content of a person's character matters more than the limitations of their body. She taught us about courage, acceptance, and unconditional love. We cannot bring her back, but we can ensure that her legacy lives on." The vote was unanimous. Sunshine Daycare would be renamed the Sarah Martinez Learning Center, and her philosophy of inclusion and acceptance would become the cornerstone of their educational mission. The dedication ceremony, held on a crisp autumn morning exactly 1 month after Sarah's death, drew hundreds of attendees. A bronze plaque was unveiled at the entrance, featuring Sarah's smiling face and the words she had spoken to so many children. Everyone can be a hero. But perhaps the most moving moment came when Rebecca Chen, the little girl Sarah had rescued from the supply closet, stepped forward to speak. Now a confident kindergartner, she had insisted on addressing the crowd. "Miss Sarah found me when I was scared and hiding," Rebecca said, her voice clear and strong. "She taught me that being different is okay and that brave people help others. I want to be like Miss Sarah when I grow up. I want to help people who are scared or different feel safe and special." Karen Williams, now serving as president of the parent-teacher organization, announced the establishment of the Sarah Martinez Scholarship Fund, designed to support the education of children with disabilities and to train teachers in inclusive practices. "Sarah changed all of us," Karen said through tears. "She changed how we see differences, how we define strength, and how we understand heroism. Every child who benefits from this scholarship will be a living tribute to her memory." The Sarah Martinez Learning Center became a model institution, drawing educators from around the world who wanted to understand how to create truly inclusive environments. Sarah's teaching philosophy was documented and shared, her methods studied and replicated in schools across the country. But beyond the formal honors and institutional changes, Sarah's true legacy lived on in the hearts and minds of everyone whose life she had touched. Tommy grew up to become a special education teacher, crediting Sarah with showing him that differences should be celebrated. Emma became a pediatric nurse, drawn to caring for others by the example of compassion she had witnessed as a young child. Years later, when these children had children of their own, they would tell the story of Miss Sarah, the teacher with the prosthetic leg who had saved 13 lives and changed an entire community's understanding of what it means to be a hero. The white flowers that had covered her home were eventually replaced by a memorial garden, maintained by volunteers who came each week to tend the blooms that grew there. A bench was placed in the center, inscribed with Sarah's final words, "Remember, all of you can be heroes." On quiet evenings, when the last child had been picked up and the halls were empty, Maria would sometimes walk through the Sarah Martinez Learning Center and pause at the memorial wall they had created in the main hallway. Photos of Sarah throughout her teaching career lined the space. Her first day as a young, nervous educator, holiday parties with children in costume, graduation ceremonies where she beamed with pride at her students' accomplishments. But the centerpiece was a photo taken just weeks before the fire, showing Sarah surrounded by her students during story time. Her prosthetic leg was visible beneath her colorful skirt, but what drew the eye was her radiant smile and the complete trust and adoration on the children's faces as they listened to her read. Below the photo, in elegant script, were the words that had become the center's motto: "Heroes come in all forms, and love has no limitations." Parents would often bring their children to stand before this memorial, using Sarah's story to teach lessons about courage, acceptance, and the importance of seeing beyond surface differences. Children who had never known Sarah learned to speak her name with reverence, understanding instinctively that she represented something precious and irreplaceable. The impact of Sarah's sacrifice rippled outward in ways she never could have imagined. Her story was featured in national magazines, inspiring legislation to improve inclusion practices in schools. Teacher training programs began incorporating her methods. Children's books were written about her life, spreading the message of acceptance to young readers across the country. But perhaps the most profound tribute came from an unexpected source. Karen Williams, the parent who had once questioned Sarah's abilities most vocally, established an annual scholarship in Sarah's name specifically for individuals with disabilities pursuing careers in education. "Sarah taught me that my prejudice was born from ignorance and fear," Karen said at the first scholarship ceremony. "She showed me that the very differences I feared were actually sources of strength and wisdom." Every teacher we help train in her honor will carry forward her legacy of unconditional acceptance and love. Tommy, now a high school senior planning to study special education, was the first recipient of the scholarship. As he accepted the award, he spoke words that would have made Sarah proud. "Miss Sarah saved my life in more ways than one. She didn't just rescue me from a burning building, she rescued me from a world where I might have grown up fearing differences instead of celebrating them. She taught me that heroes aren't defined by what they can't do, but by what they choose to do for others." As the years passed, the white flowers that visitors continued to leave at Sarah's memorial garden became a symbol recognized throughout the community. White roses for purity of heart, white lilies for the innocence she protected, white daisies for the simplicity of her love, each bloom a testament to a life that had been cut short, but whose impact would bloom forever. The children Sarah had saved grew up to become teachers, nurses, social workers, and advocates, each carrying within them the lesson she had taught by example, that true heroism lies not in the absence of limitations, but in the presence of love strong enough to overcome them. And on quiet mornings, when the dew still clung to the petals in the memorial garden, visitors would sometimes swear they could hear the gentle tapping sound of a prosthetic leg on pavement, as if Sarah Martinez was still making her rounds, still watching over the children she had loved more than life itself, still teaching the world that everyone, absolutely everyone, can be a hero.